Pentrex proudly presents the Union Pacific's 40th anniversary steam excursion powered by a recreation of Challenger 3967. On Friday, May 14, 1993, Challenger 3985 is emerging from the shop building in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The engine is resplendent in a new coat of Imron paint. A new addition to the locomotive is the elephant ear smoke deflectors, or smoke wings, installed on the smoke box. This is the first time that this engine has worn smoke deflectors. Steam is being supplied to the locomotive from a steam generator in the boiler dorm car, which is sitting on an adjacent track. Preparations are underway to fire the locomotive up once the water in the boiler has warmed. Preheating water in the boiler greatly reduces the time needed to build a full head of steam after the fire has been lit. While the boiler water is being heated, crewmen attend to last-minute mechanical preparations prior to the engine's departure from Cheyenne. During the winter, much work was done to the engine in the locomotive back shop. Here we see the locomotive being ready to have some of its superheaters reinstalled. The superheater unit started to leak badly as the engine was returning from its stint on the CSX Railroad in the fall of 1992. The leaking superheater units had to be removed from the locomotive's front end before they could be repaired. With the work completed, they were tested and are now ready to be reinstalled. These crewmen are cleaning the steam pipe fittings which the superheater units will be reconnected to. The rust and deposits must be removed from the fittings so that they will not leak when carrying the full 275 pounds of steam pressure. Besides the superheater work, new fire brick was installed in the firebox. As it has always been, repairing and maintaining steam locomotives is hot, dirty work, usually accomplished in tight conditions. With its front end parked in a tight curve, the articulation of the Challenger engine is easy to see. The look of the engine in the smoke box area is considerably changed by the elephant ear smoke deflectors. This type of smoke lifter was used on some of the Challenger engines and on the 800 class Northern engines. Rolling black smoke indicates that the oil burner has been lit in the firebox. It won't be long now before the engine is ready to leave the shop area. With the steam pressure rising steadily, the line from the steam generator is disconnected. Last-minute mechanical problems have plagued the shop crew this morning. In response, steam crewman Bob Krieger has placed a sweatband on his head underneath his cap, which is on backwards. Defiantly, he announces that he is ready.
Banzai Hoghead. Ah. I'm ready.
Less than an hour after the oil burner was lit, the engine has a full head of steam. With cylinder cocks open, the engine departs the shop area. The pilot truck and front engine unit on the Challenger are connected to the engine frame with a giant hinge pin. This allows the locomotive's front end to go through tight curves, with the rigid boiler protruding to one side or the other. This action is readily apparent as the engine comes through the curve. Today, Challenger 3985 will be pulling an empty passenger train from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Denver, Colorado. Today's trip will transport the engine and passenger equipment to Denver Union Station. This is in preparation for an historic excursion to take place on Saturday, May 15th. Before departing Cheyenne, the engine will couple to its auxiliary water and support cars. It will then pick up the passenger equipment and depart Cheyenne. Departing Cheyenne, trains immediately encounter the 0.82% grade of the new line over Sherman Hill on track number 3. Here we see the 3985 battling the grade at milepost 515.8. There is still a water tank at Spear, a reminder of the steam days. Here the train leaves the Laramie subdivision and enters the Greeley sub for the run south to Denver. The train speeds past grain elevators which stand sentinel along the track. Racing through Platteville, the special train makes full track speed as it heads south. The distance from Cheyenne to Denver is approximately 100 miles. South of Platteville, the 3985 and its train leave the siding after meeting a northbound hopper train. Notice the head-end crew leaning out of the cab of the 3985. They will notify engineer Steve Lee when the entire train is on the main line and he can begin to accelerate. The speed of the train is down to 20 miles per hour as it rolls through the industrial north end of Denver. Swinging off the main line, the 3985 and its train immediately roll through a Y before backing into the adjacent Union Pacific Intermodal Yard. As it rolls through the Y, the 3985 is making history. This is the first time that a Union Pacific Challenger engine has visited Denver since steam was dropped on the railroad in the late 1950s. Steve Lee has the Sanders running as the big engine negotiates the tight curvature in the Y. The 3985 was built for the Union Pacific Railroad in 1943 by the American Locomotive Works. The engine last saw service in 1957, pulling freight. For many years, it was stored at Cheyenne and was eventually put on display near the depot in 1975. Of the 105 Challengers built, it is one of only 2 that were saved. In 1979, the locomotive was taken off display and rebuilt in the back shop with volunteer labor. The Union Pacific consented to letting the engine enter excursion service, which it did in 1981, following the completion of its rebuilding. Built as a coal-burning engine, the 3985 powered trips primarily over Sherman Hill during the 1980s. In order to take the engine to more places on the railroad, the 3985 was converted to oil in 1990. The train backs into a track in the intermodal yard after successfully negotiating the Y. Here the train will be parked for the night. In preparation for its excursion duty on Saturday morning, the engine and train will be serviced during the evening hours. The 3985 and its passenger train are in Denver to celebrate 40 years of steam excursions on the Union Pacific Railroad. The first official steam excursion was sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club on May 17, 1953. The trip ran from Denver to Laramie, Wyoming, and returned over Sherman Hill. The train was powered by Challenger engine 3967. On Saturday, May 15th, the long-awaited steam excursion is about to begin. Overnight, the 3985 has been renumbered to portray sister engine 3967, which pulled the original excursion in 1953. The 3967 was equipped with smoke deflectors, which explains why the 3985 has had smoke wings applied for this event. Like the original, today's trip is being sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club. Almost 500 passengers will be on board the train, which has been sold out for almost 3 months. Steve Lee, Union Pacific Steam Operations Manager and 3967's engineer, discusses some last-minute details of today's trip. Departing Denver Union Station promptly at 7 a.m., the train threads its way through the Union Pacific Yard and by the many industries in North Denver. The first part of today's excursion is over the route of the former Denver Pacific Railway. This line was built between Denver and Cheyenne by the citizens of Denver to connect with the Union Pacific. Because the UP had bypassed Denver on its transcontinental route, the Denver Pacific Railway offered travelers the option to connect with the Union Pacific at Cheyenne. This line was completed in 1870. The Union Pacific later acquired the line, eventually rerouting the north end to join the main line at Spear instead of Cheyenne. The current Rocky Mountain Railroad Club president, Joe Prisilak, explains the club's purpose and its history.
The Rocky Mountain Railroad Club was founded way back in 1938 by 3 or 4 rail fans who used to go out and film trains along the right-of-ways of the various railroads, and they all decided that it would certainly be nice to form a club. And so the club was formed in 1938, and we are now in our 55th year of existence. We have close to 1,000 membership, with approximately 500 people, members in this area, and the balance being throughout many of the states and some foreign countries. Our main goal is the perpetuation of railroad history. We're basically a fan group. We have modelers in our club, we have authors, we have photographers, and basically we just like to put together trips on the railroads and basically sit down as fans and ride the trips and have photo run-bys and just really have a good time.
I'm Bud Lair. I'm the trip chairman for the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club, and I also handle the telephone service into our club, but primarily working with trips.
Bud explains the key elements necessary for a successful trip.
Putting a trip together like this, we depend a lot upon our past experience. We try not to reinvent the wheel. If we do things that are successful or have been in the past, we use those. And then I think the attention to detail, we try to work out every facet of things in a trip of this type so that we have no glitches. Now that doesn't mean we don't have glitches, but we really are attending to the detail, every last detail that we can think of. A year and a half ago, we decided to do this trip along with the UP to celebrate this 40th anniversary. And the information that we started to put together was the contracts with the railroad, and a lot of pre-planning, tremendous amount of pre-planning has gone into this. And we divide into subcommittees. We have a wonderful committee that does the commissary work with the train. We have safety committee. And finally it all falls together, but it's a tremendous effort to put one of these on and do it right with all the details ironed out so the trip goes smoothly. We want to have as fine a trip as we can for our passengers, and I think the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club has been noted for this for many, many years. I think this is a premier excursion.
We asked him about future trips with the Union Pacific Railroad.
Well, I'm very encouraged now that the Union Pacific has gone into buying more equipment. There for a while they sold off most of their passenger equipment, and today we have a lot more, which means that we can offer a trip of this type for less money than we did a few years ago. And it's available to more people because of this lower price. But it's still an expensive proposition any way you look at it.
The only reserved seating on the train were the extra fare seats in the 2 dome coaches and dome diner. This was the first space on the train to sell out for obvious reasons. All 3 dome cars were recently repurchased by the Union Pacific and rehabilitated for excursion service. Passengers in the dome coach Challenger enjoy the view as the train rolls along north of Brighton, Colorado. As Highway 85 comes alongside and parallels the Union Pacific track, a large number of cars can be seen following the progress of the train. Watching the massive cars from the train proved to be entertaining for passengers. Coach seats aboard the train are spacious and comfortable. The large, clean picture windows offer excellent views of the passing countryside. Noted railroad photographer Richard Kindig was aboard the first 3967 excursion and offers his thoughts on today's historic trip.
It's a great trip. I'm very happy to be riding the Union Pacific again. I don't go on very many trips anymore.
We asked Mr. Kindig about the first trip in 1953.
Well, it went off very smoothly. We had quite a stop up at Beaufort, Wyoming. We were there an hour and a half. watching the trains go by. They just put us in the siding and let freights and passenger trains go by. So that was a very pleasant way to spend a couple of hours.
What did you see while you were there?
Oh, they had double-headed Challengers, and I saw about 3 passenger trains with steam. It was just an average day on the UP. Lots of things going on.
We asked Mr. Kindig how he got interested in trains.
My dad was a railroad conductor, Union Pacific. So I just sort of drifted into it. I rode the trains with him when I was on the pass, the annual pass, for quite a while. I could ride trains for nothing. No streamliners, just the Pacific Limited and lower graded trains. And I just casually started taking pictures back about 1934. Yeah, sure. And it grew and grew.
What were some of the first cameras that you used?
I had an old 116 Kodak to begin with. It's 2 1/4 by 4 1/2. And it's a good camera for engines. It's a kind of a longer, narrower picture, so engines fitted well. Then I changed to a Graflex postcard size. That's 3 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I stuck with that until I quit taking pictures. I started color in 1939. I eventually woke up and got my color camera mounted on my Graflex, so I could shoot both of them at once. Had to use both hands. I didn't rig it so I could shoot both of them with one trigger.
We asked him if there was any one event that was memorable.
It was all great. I enjoyed all of them.
We also asked him about his involvement with the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club.
I was a charter member back in 1938, I think we started. And every year they would lower the number, your card number, when you paid your dues. So I started out with about number 16 or something. Now I'm down to 2. I don't want 1 or 0.
Ed Haley is also a longtime member of the Rocky Club.
I joined in 1942. I'm not one of the charter members. I got in quite early. I had a heck of a time finding my way in. They never had a phone number or an address that you could get in touch with them, and they'd have these little blurbs in the newspaper about they were running the last trolley car in Denver on 4 different lines that were to be abandoned the next day, and they were making a trip out to the various roundhouses and shops. And finally I got the name of one of the guys, R.H. Kindig, who went to high school with me, and I knew who he was, so I talked to him and finally got down to the club. And my first meeting was sometime in 1942, I think it was.
Mr. Haley reflects on his many years as trip chairman for the club.
I spent off and on 25 years. I didn't organize the trip, the original 3967 trip. That was done by the club president, who was Everett Rohr, and he had worked for the Union Pacific, so he knew his way around real well. And in fact, he had so much pull, he got the 3967 brought all the way down from Oregon, just special for that trip because it was one of his favorite locomotives. Well, we ran out of Denver into Cheyenne, and then went up the hill and stopped at Buford. And we must have spent about 3 hours at Buford and just let the trains come by. And it was just a steady stream of double headers on freights and fast passenger trains and mail trains, one after the other. In fact, you couldn't do that today. I mean, even if you sat out there on the hill, there wouldn't be that kind of traffic, because that was before the Harriman cutoff was, I mean, the new line over the hill was put in, and everything went up over Sherman in those days. And we just spent 3 hours there taking pictures, one right after the other.
What are your feelings 40 years later?
Old. No, it's wonderful to have no responsibilities and sit and look out the window and not worry about getting everybody off at the photo stops and staying on schedule and that sort of thing. But that was a lot of fun doing that too.
To accommodate the large number of passengers aboard the train, seats in the lounge car Sun Valley were sold for the day. This car was built by the American Car Foundry in 1949 and originally named the Colorado River. When built, the car had a barber shop, valet service, card room, plus bar and lounge areas. The car received its current name when it was completely rebuilt in 1989. Jim Ehrenberger was only 15 years old when he rode the original 3967 trip. He tells us how he came to ride the train.
Well, in 1953, I read in the Denver paper about the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club, of which I didn't know anything about, and they were planning on running a steam excursion from Denver to Laramie. And I had a friend who was a ticket agent at the UP depot, and I asked him about the possibility of getting on the train, since I thought it sounded like a real interesting trip. After talking to him, he made some arrangements through the superintendent and the traffic agent that I could get on the train at Borey, Wyoming, which is 9 miles west of Cheyenne. I didn't drive at the time because I was only 15, so my folks took me out to Borey, and that's where I picked up with the 3967 excursion. However, the real interesting thing on this, other than the fact that they stopped the train for me, and a couple of other people got on too, but it's the fact that the train ticket cost $2.20 round trip plus 33 cents tax, which was only $2.53 for an excursion over Sherman Hill behind the 3967.
We asked him about his recollections of the trip.
Okay, the first thing, of course, we went right up to Buford, and the train pulled in the siding and unloaded the passengers. And in those days, they didn't care what direction the people went, and they went across the main lines to the south side, and the whole parade and fleet of passenger and freight trains came up over the hill. Westbounds all had double headers, and of course the helpers were dropping down the hill, light without any train, and then the eastbound trains were single locomotives pulling the trains. And we stayed there 2 or 3 hours at Buford, including a little hail and light snowfall, but it was a great day watching the parade of trains. And of course, I had never been around rail fans before, and I learned quite a bit about taking pictures and watching, and I was quite impressed with the big cameras that Kindig and Otto Perry and some of the other fans had. So that sort of led me to getting into the large format photography.
Like many others, Jim has been actively involved in the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club over the years.
Well, I joined the club right at that time. Actually, it was a little illegal because I think they had a age limit. Maybe it was 18 at that time, but I joined at age 15, and that was in 1953. So I've been involved with the club ever since. I've served on board of director positions and also president between 1969 and 1970.
Charles Max was also aboard the 1953 trip. We asked him what his thoughts were 40 years later.
I'm glad that able to do, you know, as we get older, we never know what's ahead of us, and so I'm glad that me and my wife can both be on the trip again after 40 years. I remember the 40-year trip. We got up there on Spear and that area and up there, and it was hailing and cold, and although it did produce beautiful black and white smoke coming out of the engines that were all steam going by at that time. And I got interested in the Railroad Club in 1952. Happened to see a flyer in there about a streetcar going to go to Golden. And I've been a member ever since.
What did it cost to ride the original trip?
$10. Of course, we didn't get a free lunch. But then this one here is $155, and we get a box lunch. So I guess they call that inflation. But I got my flyer at home on it. I looked it up the other day just to see what it was. And I didn't believe it was only $10. I thought it'd be about 20 at least. But $10 is unbelievable for a trip like that all the way to Laramie and back.
Coffee and donuts were available to passengers after departing Denver. Due to the lengthy 300-mile round trip, it was necessary to schedule the departure out of Denver at 7 a.m. Today's train consists entirely of lightweight streamlined cars built in the late 40s, middle 50s, and early 1960s. Most of these cars were used on Union Pacific streamlined passenger trains until Amtrak took over the nation's passenger train business in 1971. The first photo run of the day was made just south of Spear on the Colorado-Wyoming border. The last few miles of the line into Spear are on a steep grade. The engine put on quite a show as it climbed through a cut at the state line. At Spear, the train left the Denver line and joined mainline track number 3 over Sherman Hill. This track, which is used by most westbound trains, was completed in 1953. The grade on this track is only 0.82%, while the grade on the old line is 1.55%. Almost 10 miles longer than the old line, Track 3 completely eliminated the need for helper engines over Sherman Hill. Although construction was underway, the line was not completed when the original Excursion was run. Snow fences lace the barren landscape as the 3967 works its way up the hill between MK and Lynch. In the background, a midday thunderstorm portends trouble weather-wise for the remainder of the day. Getting this many people on and off the train quickly was a tough job which the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club members handled very efficiently. The main concern for passengers, both on and off the train, was safety. Rain forced the cancellation of 2 photo run-bys. However, this did provide an opportunity for the passengers to enjoy a substantial and appetizing box lunch. prairie grassland gives way to lodgepole pine trees as the train climbs higher. The highest elevation on Track 3 is 7,867 feet. An occasional ranch house borders the railroad along Track 3. At each photo location, club members carefully established and supervised the photo lines to allow everyone a good vantage point and to ensure safety for participants. With the water tank at Harriman in the background, the train makes a photo run-by through the signals at milepost 544.1. Seeking a higher vantage point, many photographers have climbed a steep hill strewn with rock outcroppings. Hoping that the sun would appear, the train waits several minutes before charging by the photographers. The sun has revealed itself for the second running of the same photo run. A sharp, cold wind is buffeting the train as it rolls across the fill west of Perkins, Wyoming. One of the more interesting cars on the train is the Union Pacific Museum car, the Promontory. The doors of the former baggage car can be opened, providing fresh air and an exciting view. Inside the car, model trains of various gauges can be found on display. In addition, other relics and memorabilia are prominently displayed throughout the car. This would include photographs of notable celebrities who rode Union Pacific passenger trains over the years, number plates and insignias from now-gone trains and engines, silver serving sets, and drumheads from famous passenger trains, such as the Portland Rose. The sky continues to look more threatening as the train approaches the outskirts of Laramie. Gathered in front of the engine at Laramie are passengers who rode the original trip in 1953. This made for an interesting reunion as camera shutters clicked, recording the gathering for posterity. Who in their wildest imagination could have predicted that this trip would be recreated 40 years later? The original 3967 was built by Alco in May of 1942. The engine was last used in revenue service in 1957 and then stored at Cheyenne awaiting disposition. The locomotive was scrapped in March of 1960. Passengers and local residents watch as crew members service and fuel the locomotive. In addition to water, the engine took on fuel supplied from a truck. Departing Laramie, our camera takes you in the cab of the 3967 for the ride over Sherman Hill. Fireman Lynn Nystrom checks the various valve settings and gauges prior to starting up the hill. Before leaving Laramie, the train was turned on the Y for the return to Denver. Prior to departure, a steady rain began to fall, canceling any further photo runs on the trip back to Denver. With all in readiness, Lynn starts the injector. This will stay on for the duration of the trip upgrade to the summit at Sherman. The injector supplies water to the boiler. Moving slowly, the engine negotiates several crossovers as it departs the yard and enters the main line. Cab whistles signal the train's entry into each track block. Once the engine has cleared the crossovers, Steve Lee widens out on the throttle as the battle upgrade begins. As the engine picks up speed, Mr. Lee changes the setting on the Johnson bar. This reduces the amount of stroke to the valves in the cylinders, allowing the steam to be used more efficiently and moving the engine faster. With the throttle substantially open, Fireman Nystrom pours sand into the firebox opening. The tremendous draft created when an engine is working hard pulls the sand through the fire tubes at a high velocity. This scours the tubes, removing excess soot which is pulled out of the stack along with the exhaust. This procedure is necessary to remove soot buildup, which hampers the steaming capabilities of the boiler. The engine speedometer indicates the train is gradually accelerating up the hill. This is the view forward from the engineer's seat. Notice how the smoke deflectors impair the forward view for the engineer and fireman. Although deflectors were effective in helping to keep smoke out of the cabs, they severely limited a crew's forward vision. The train's speed has reached its maximum of 38 miles per hour as the engine battles the 0.82% grade on number 2 track eastbound. This is the normal routing for eastbound trains over Sherman Hill. Interesting rock formations can be seen as the train rolls through the rugged Wyoming countryside. Using his firing expertise, Lynn Nystrom has kept the boiler pressure at its maximum of 275 pounds for the entire trip up the hill. A whistle in the cab indicates the train is nearing a crossover, which the engine will have to negotiate at a reduced speed before entering Hermosa Tunnel. In response, Engineer Lee makes a brake application and cuts back on the throttle. He also slips the Johnson bar forward as the train's speed drops for the approach to Hermosa Tunnel. Although the tunnel is only a quarter mile long, it is necessary for the engine to work through the tunnel because of the grade. With hands in the air, Steve Lee signals that it is now Lynn Nystrom's responsibility to control the amount of smoke in the tunnel. Steve will not touch any of the throttle or control valve settings until after they exit the east end of the tunnel. In a flurry of activity, the cab windows are closed for the upcoming tunnel. Hermosa Tunnel is one of 2 parallel bores, each 1,827 feet long. Notice how the cab quickly fills with smoke and steam as the engine blasts through the tunnel at 25 miles per hour. You can imagine what it was like in the cab of a coal-burning big boy locomotive pulling a heavy freight through the tunnel at 8 to 10 miles per hour. Exiting the tunnel, the track levels out, increasing train speed. Rocks, shrubs, snow fences, and diverging Track 3 can be seen in the background as the train rolls east from Dale Junction. Climbing again, the engine is working the last few miles of grade to the summit at Sherman. The flues are sanded one last time, while the uphill trip still provides enough draft to accomplish the task. As the engine crests the summit at the 8,013-foot elevation, the throttle is shut off and the train begins its descent to Spear. At Spear, the train will stop for a crew change. The remainder of the trip will be in darkness, with the Excursion train arriving back in Denver at 11:15 p.m. No complaints were heard, however, as this exciting and well-executed trip was enjoyed by all. On Sunday, May 16th, another Union Pacific Challenger has appeared in the Denver Intermodal Yard. The smiles on the faces of the crew members indicate they're having a lot of fun this morning as confused rail fans look on. No Challenger engine was ever assigned the number 3718. If Challenger 3985 had been converted to oil during its career, it more than likely would have been renumbered 3718. For at least one day, befuddled rail fans will be scratching their heads as the engine races by. Even with the early hour on Sunday morning, a small group of curious spectators is on hand to witness the train's departure from Denver. Today, the train will be ferried back to Cheyenne, the base of operations for the Union Pacific steam program. Departing Denver, the 3718 meets an inbound freight waiting to enter the yard. Leaving Greeley, Colorado, the 3718 picks up speed as it heads north. Just over the Wyoming border, the fireman sands the flues of the 3718 as the engine works upgrade south of Spear. Arriving at the Cheyenne yard, the 3718 uncouples from its train and heads down the approach track to the shop building. Engineer Steve Lee reflects on the 40th anniversary steam excursion and the continuing relationship with the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club.
It was kind of a joint idea. The steam crew and some of the UP Historical Society members became aware a couple of years ago that the 40th anniversary of this, what we call the first steam excursion, was upon us, was coming up. We kicked the idea around a little bit, looked at the calendar. We noticed we couldn't run the trip on the same day, but with the Rocky Club still in Denver, we contacted them to see if they'd be interested in sponsoring it if we wanted to run it. And we worked it out with them so that we could recreate the trip as close as we possibly could and re-letter and renumber the locomotive and kind of take a step back in time. I was well satisfied with everything as far as the Rocky Club. They did their usual good job with the ticket sales, the promotion, with the crewing of the train, the handling of the photo lines, and the crowd control and all that. They've been running trips for more than 40 years, and they've got the drill pretty well down. They did a very nice job. We were disappointed in the weather, of course, all the rain and the doom and gloom, but there's not much anybody can do about that. And we had some operational difficulties as far as some delays, not due to the locomotive or the train or anything like that, but pretty well I was pleased, yes.
We asked Steve where he got all those Challenger engines.
We got a little shop over there in the roundhouse. We make them during the winter when we don't have anything else to do. Yeah, this is probably the first time a Challenger has been south of LaSalle and on into Denver, probably since about 56 or 57. They stopped running them down there in the late 50s when they stopped running steam altogether. We've had the 3985 down to LaSalle twice since it's been restored. We took it down there in 81 on its initial break-in trip, and we took it down there about 2 years ago on another break-in trip, but we've never had it south of LaSalle. So yeah, it's been quite some time since any kind of a Challenger has been down there.
Do you think anyone could have predicted the running of this trip 20 years ago?
I think 20 years ago, no one would have seriously predicted that a Challenger would even be restored. Much less do this. No, I don't think, even a year ago, I don't think it would have been predicted. It's a pleasant feeling. You're kind of recreating history. The best moment for me was over at Laramie when they got the folks that had ridden the trip 40 years ago and lined them up in front of the engine, and here it is 40 years later, the same locomotive number and the same fellas, and that really brought it home how long it had been, and that was pleasant.
As the locomotive enters its stall in the Cheyenne shop, Pentrex concludes its coverage of this historic 3-day railroading event. This was an unusual happening that will probably never be duplicated. Once in the shop, the smoke wings and the temporary number plates will be removed, and the 3985 will once again have its own identity. Steve Lee and his crew, the Union Pacific Railroad, and the members of the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club are to be commended for their diligent efforts toward the success of the 40th anniversary steam excursion. Pentrex has many more exciting programs available for your viewing pleasure. Here are just a few. Pentrex presents an exclusive and rare look at a Union Pacific rotary snowplow at work. In January of 1993, a series of cold Pacific storms dropped large amounts of snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. The Union Pacific Railroad's main line through the Feather River Canyon was unusually hard hit. While spreaders kept the main line open, trains made slow progress through the canyon due to inoperative signals, snowbound sidings, and frozen switches. Pentrex has captured the beauty of this winter wonderland on tape as trains attempt to negotiate the snow-covered Feather River route. For the first time since it acquired the line in 1982, the UP dispatched one of their Cheyenne-based rotary snowplows to Portola, California. Not since the days of the Western Pacific Railroad has a rotary been needed to protect the main line through the Feather River Canyon. From trackside and on the train, you will experience this awesome machine at work on the Union Pacific. Steve Lee, manager of steam operations for the UP, will take us on a tour through the cab of the rotary, explaining its history and how it operates. Santa Fe 484 Baldwin steam locomotive number 3751 has triumphantly returned to the main line. The engine's much-awaited debut came after 10 years of extensive restoration work by the San Bernardino Railroad Historical Society. The engine moved under its own power for the first time on August 13, 1991. In December, the engine made a break-in run at the head of a freight train over the Santa Fe main line in Southern California. The engine then powered a recreation of the Santa Fe's California Limited passenger train. This excursion commemorated the 99th anniversary of the train's debut. The steam special ran from Los Angeles to Bakersfield, California, and returned via Cajon and Tehachapi passes. The engine performed flawlessly as it tackled the stiff grades over the mountains. Two FP45 diesel locomotives painted in the dazzling war bonnet paint scheme were coupled behind the steam engine as helpers. Pentrex has captured all the excitement of this big steam locomotive in action as it returned to the Santa Fe main line for the first time in 38 years. Our coverage of this historic engine includes its removal from Viaduct Park in San Bernardino and its subsequent ferry move to Fontana in 1986, the engine's first movements at Fontana, and its break-in runs at the head of freight following its restoration. Pentrex crews also covered the entire 4-day maiden voyage of the engine in excursion service. This is an exciting video on Santa Fe 3751's return to steam. Available now from Pentrex. Pentrex presents an endearing look at today's Northwestern Pacific Railroad. This historic Northern California rail line still survives in the early 1990s. Venerable SD9 diesels built in the middle 1950s still power through trains. The Southern Pacific has the largest remaining active fleet of these locomotives in the country. 6 days a week, trains travel the 156-mile line from Suisun City to Willits. Lumber is still the chief commodity hauled by the railroad, as it has been for years. Much of the traffic originates in Eureka on the North Coast Railroad, formerly the Eureka Southern. The NWP interchanges with the North Coast Railroad in Willits, forwarding the train to the Southern Pacific at Suisun City. Petaluma is the base of operations for the railroad. Sprint trains and their crews originate here, running both north and south on the line. For several years, trains negotiating the scenic north end of the line have run at night. Pentrex's coverage of the NWP showcases the entire railroad. This production was taped during various seasons over a 3-year period. In 1992, our cameras captured the running of trains from Willits to Petaluma during daylight hours. This provides a rare look at the exciting scenery the train normally passes through at night. A brief look at operations of the Eureka Southern and the newly formed North Coast Railroad are included. For the first few months of its operation, the North Coast Railroad leased NWP diesels. This recreated the days when the Northwestern Pacific still owned the line from Willits to Eureka. This exciting 110-minute show spotlights the Cadillac of diesel locomotives, the SD9. You'll see these engines battling upgrade to Ridge Summit. Watch as 7 units conquer Cordelia Hill, pulling a 59-car loaded lumber train. The locomotives never sounded better as they roll up and down the NWP main line. Experience the drama of today's Northwestern Pacific in this entertaining production from Pentrex.